DXM stands for dextromethorphan. It's sold as an over-the-counter cough suppressant, but it's also a dissociative drug. DXM suppresses your cough by turning off certain parts of your brain that tell your body to cough. This works great for when you have a cold, but people started to realize once you take enough of it, it can start to turn off other parts of your brain too. This results in many symptoms which we'll see all of in today's story. U/Skills for Reals posted his experience with this deliriant dissociative 8 years ago, titled DXM The Fourth Plateau, My Story, Why It's Not Worth It. Before we read the story, let me explain what plateaus are. So in the culture of DXM, these plateaus refer to distinct levels of experience that users report when taking different doses of this cough suppressant, which also acts as a psychoactive drug at higher doses. These plateaus range from mild stimulation to full-blown dissociative states, and they help categorize the intensity and type of effects one might expect. With all of that out of the way, let's read U/Skills for Reals' experience. What's up, everyone? As you can tell from the title, I will be sharing with you guys as best as I can articulate my fourth plateau experience and why those who have experienced it, such as myself, will tell you it's most certainly not worth it. Let me begin by telling you that the fourth plateau resembles absolutely nothing of the first three plateaus. Nothing. The fourth plateau is like a completely different drug. I know drugs affect everyone differently, but the effects are similar enough for me to hopefully dissuade you from trying this. Okay, here's my story. So the previous night before trying this, I had done a moderate third plateau dose, so I don't know if it affected my fourth plateau trip or not. I wasn't sure if maybe I had a slight tolerance, so for whatever reason, I decided to take a way higher dose the next night. I went to Walmart and bought 3 packs of gel caps for a total of 900 milligrams. I weigh 130 pounds, so 900 milligrams for me is a 15.2 milligram per kilogram trip. The previous night I had taken 704 milligrams, so I thought 200 milligrams more the next night wouldn't be that big of a difference, but boy, I was wrong. I got home and dosed all 900 milligrams and laid down for a bit while I waited for it to kick in. I'd also dosed 100 milligrams of DPH for potentiation. It came on like any normal trip dose, comes on slowly as usual. As the effects started to kick in, it felt like a high third plateau dose, so I was thinking, hell yeah, this is nice. Nothing out of the ordinary. Well, slowly but surely, it starts to get a lot more powerful. So at this point, I decided to get off my computer and lay on my bed in the dark and listen to tunes. This is where my memory gets really hazy. I don't remember how I got to this point, but I remember all of a sudden being on a whole nother dimension of messed up. Nothing made sense whatsoever. I was no longer human. I was having these strange thought loops that made no sense, and what I remember is being this tiny thing inside my body, like looping around my blood vessels. I know that makes no sense, but it's the best way I can describe it. Just over and over, and the thing was, I felt like I was just getting higher and higher and higher. If I closed my eyes, I would begin to astral project into completely different worlds, but not thinking, wow, this is so cool. It was more like I literally have no idea what is going on, with hardly any thoughts. My heart rate and blood pressure were through the absolute roof, and I was beginning to worry because I thought for sure I was going to die. I thought there was no way in hell my heart wouldn't explode or just stop beating, because I don't know how my heart could somehow beat that hard and fast for such a long time. I considered calling 911, but I decided against it. As I said, my memory was extremely hazy, so I'm trying to organize what I can remember as best as I can. So at some point, I remember coming to one of a few conclusions. I thought that either 1, I was going to die, 2, I was already dead and I was stuck in some strange limbo afterlife, or 3, that I wasn't human, had never been a human, and had never existed, and it was only at this moment that I realized it. At the fourth plateau, you are not human anymore, and you would be convinced you were never a human. Sure, if I looked in the mirror, I was inside a human body, but me, whatever I was, wasn't human. I was some being occupying a human's body. Physically, my body was going through hell. My breathing was extremely slow, and I was kind of worried I would stop breathing at some point. point. When I went to the bathroom, one, if you thought you knew RoboWalk, think again. My limbs hardly functioned and had to grip onto something to make sure I didn't faceplant. When I got to the toilet, I would stare at the toilet and not be able to pee. I had no idea how to use whatever muscles I had to make urine come out. It would probably take me 10 minutes each time I got to the bathroom to urinate. Okay, so at some point, I figured I would sleep. How? Well, I figured if I just closed my eyes, I'd go to bed and wake up fine. So it was at this point, I don't think I actually fell asleep. It was more like I literally just lost consciousness for an hour and then randomly came to, only to be just as messed up as before, experiencing the same out-of-body stuff and thought loops that made no sense. I don't know how long this went on for, but it slowly died down over a period of a long time. Little edit for the trip part, if I were to kind of reassociate myself in the room, I would look at something like my door. I heard constant voices throughout the night that had this sinister, evil vibe to them, and they would say things like, "You're worthless." More edits as I remember. I felt like for the most part of the trip, I was blind. It was like the external world wasn't there and it was near impossible to focus my eyes on it. It was more like you were still absolutely messed up, but you seriously wanted it to go away. I got extremely scattered sleep, and each time I slept, I could only sleep for like 30 minutes at a time. I was no longer at the fourth plateau, but it was like wholly beyond messed up. I was under the impression that I should have went to the ER either that night or that morning because I seriously thought I had overdosed that night or that I had suffered a stroke. I felt absolutely brain dead. I had awareness of my surroundings, but if you were to try to talk to me, I could hardly understand what you were trying to say. Like if you were giving me instructions on how to do something very simple, I would understand the words you said. They were clearly English words, but making sense of anything you said was impossible. My heart rate and blood pressure was still pretty high and wouldn't calm down. My head, so this is what added to me thinking I suffered an overdose or stroke. There was this sharp electricity flowing through my body and my head. The electricity would sometimes zap through my body and I would get goosebumps every time it happened. I'm pretty sure this is because of the excessive amount of serotonin in my body, but this is what gave me the biggest scare. The brain dead feeling and physical messed up feeling lasted over 24 hours after my initial dosing and finally went away after like 36 hours. So that was this guy's experience. Before we move on to the next story, I want to just give some light on what happened here. He said that he tripped the day before, right? Well, common advice in the world of DXM is to wait as many weeks as the plateau you went to trip again. So he said he reached the third plateau the night before, so he should have waited 3 weeks before taking any more DXM at all. It just gets it out of your system, it's good for your liver, for your brain, and that's probably why he had such a bad trip. So yeah, DXM isn't as bad as this story makes it out to be, and that's why I'm going to read this next story. This story comes from accompanied_fly_678 on Reddit. I never had a proper DXM trip, always ended up throwing up no matter what, but this time I was prepared. 11 a.m. I'm bored and remember reading that taking about 150 milligrams of DPH gives a nice euphoria experience, so I chugged down 50 milliliters of Benadryl cough syrup, hoping it doesn't synergize with DXM later on. I fight the sleepy feeling for some time, but eventually fall asleep at 3 to 4 p.m. 1:30 p.m. I have my lunch and get prepared to keep my stomach fairly empty until nighttime. 1 a.m.-ish. I'm feeling some dessert-ish, fever, dream-ish vibe. At this point, I don't know anything. I seem to have forgotten everything, even the fact that I have consciousness. My vision is still hazy. I go to check my phone and I can't see anything properly. I have to close one eye to barely be able to notice the letters on my screen. I go to my call log to check if I'd accidentally called someone. Bad mistake. I end up calling someone and barely cut the call before too many rings. At this point, I'm pretty sure I've experienced eco death. 2 a.m.-ish. I'm snapping in and out of consciousness. I don't know how to process anything. It feels like a 90s retro movie. The feeling is hard to describe, but I start getting some flashbacks at this point. I remember that I had taken DXM and I slowly remember my identity. I remember smoking cigarettes. I look for the ashtray but can't find it anywhere and I begin to panic. I get up and look everywhere and I still can't find it. At that point, I have convinced myself that I got out of my room and murdered someone. I don't know how I came to this conclusion, but it was bad. I look at my hands to check for any blood stains. At this point, any intrusive thoughts are growing more and more and I'm getting scared of myself. I'm in a really weird state state of mind at that point. I go to the bathroom and look at myself in the mirror, and it felt different. I remember seeing myself and noticing how emotionless I looked. I go back to my bed and lay down. 3 a.m.-ish. I start to use my phone. It was a struggle to read the words, even with one eye closed, and I was a bit better at that point. I remember that I had taken DXM and I was just tripping, but I felt like the trip was never ending and I would have to bear this pain for eternity. I wasn't panicking and was fairly calm. I was pretty much just emotionless and laying down in the bed. I am scared to listen to music because I don't want to dissociate more. I eventually fall asleep listening to Nusrat Fateh Ali Khan, or I think so, I'm not sure. 5 a.m.-ish. I now have grasped my consciousness back and I'm fairly normal but still tripping. I check my call logs and messages to see if I messaged anyone. To my luck, I hadn't, thank God. I look beside me and I see my ashtray on a plate with a mug on top of it. I eventually fall asleep. 9:30 a.m. I wake up properly now, although it still feels like I'm tripping. Feels like first plateau, but my body still feels fizzy. I feel like I still have short-term memory loss and it's gonna be a few hours before I return completely to normal. Please note that I have done a fair amount of research before even thinking about trying to take such a high dose. If my trip report motivates anyone to try this, please be careful and do your research. It wasn't a pleasant experience and I wanted to try my hands on psychedelics before this trip, but now I'm scared. Some people may also have enzyme deficiency and DXM will hit them harder, so please be careful and never take DXM and antidepressants. Alright, now it's Poi again, and at this point I want to clarify that most of these bad experiences with DXM only happen when you're being stupid. They happen when you've never done it before but you decide to go to the 4th plateau. They happen when you decide to trip 2 days in a row like with the first story. In reality, DXM is safe, it can be fun, you just have to be really careful and know what you're doing. Do hella research before doing anything at all, obviously. Now let's get into this next story. This story comes from psychonautwiki.org, titled 300 milligrams DXM, brink of the third. At around 3 p.m., I took out 20 15 milligram DXM gel caps from the bottle and one single 25 milligram DPH or Benadryl pill. I was mostly hoping to go somewhere close to the 3rd plateau, and I think I got pretty close. I have a weak liver. The DPH was to help with nausea, so I took the pills, then waited and played Osu and talked with my boyfriend over Discord. At around the 30-minute mark, I started feeling heavy and drowsy, probably from the DPH, which always makes me feel that way. I was thinking the DXM would probably wake me up, and it did. Although I felt very high during the trip, but that might have been because that was the highest dose that I took at the time. After about 30 more minutes, I started the DXM come up. It was very intense, but I surprisingly didn't have any nausea at all. The DPH had worked well. It felt very euphoric, as this was the highest dose I had done so far, but also felt very heavy and groggy because of the DPH. So it was kind of a weird feeling, although enjoyable. For a while, I stared at my ceiling and it genuinely looked like it was shifting and moving around. The spots on my ceiling looked like waves and I could see many small patches of brown dots all over it, which I don't notice now. Heavy dissociation as well, and my body was almost completely sedated as touch was weird and I did not feel pain. I've always had this way of doing DXM, but I would lay down in my bed with headphones, blast loud music, and simply lay down, chill, and put my arm around my eyes to block all light. Closing my eyes, I instantly felt like I was looking into a dark void instead of just my closed eyelids. Then I started seeing soft flashes of light, and then my imagination started becoming extremely clear and vivid. If I tried to unfocus my eyes, my imagination would take over and I would be thrown into the hallways of the Dorohedoro manga. It was quite disturbing as my music was kind of scary and I saw vivid images of gigantic monsters pulling an entire city from their arms, a girl's eyes being gouged out with a scalpel, as well as feeling like I could softly feel the scalpel cut my own eyes, then her head ripping off and coming out with the spine. Although these scary, vivid, dream-like states stopped as soon as I took off my headphones. With nicer music, I usually tried to focus on the actual closed-eye visuals of the drug, but they were mostly geometric shapes, like cogs and triangles or snowflakes. Fractals, I think. They were super pretty to look at and changed subtly with the music as I laid there for a good 15 or 30 minutes, describing what I was seeing to my boyfriend. Occasionally, vivid hallways of fractals came into my vision fast and faded and then came back in black and white manga panel style. Time felt extremely slow. Everything looked slow, in fact, as my pupils were about 90% dilated. 2 minutes felt like an hour, and an hour felt like 5 hours. Every time I would close my eyes and see things, it would feel like an actual place I went to. The dissociation made it extremely easy for me to think I was actually actually in the videos I was watching. I watched a lot of AMVs and genuinely felt like I was part of those videos. It gave me a lot of intense euphoria and I felt extremely satisfied. Like I had spent an entire summer with my friends, but it had only been 4 minutes. Also, the food tasted god-awful and I couldn't feel my tongue. After about 6 hours or so of doing nothing but talking, being happy, and feeling extreme ecstasy because of how intense and amazing music felt, and generally a lot of staring, I headed off to bed and closed off all my lights. My room was in pure darkness. I stared into the deep void with my eyes open. I could see vivid stroke-like geometrical patterns everywhere. The extremely faint light from the outside slowly shifted and turned, and my room was waving around and everything looked like I was looking at a video. I stared at it for a good 20 minutes in pure awe over what my brain could do. I had intense tracers from small amounts of light, and when I checked my phone, it would look like it lagged behind time at 30 FPS, and everything looked extremely smoothened and pretty. If I stared into my phone, the surrounding darkness would turn into a galaxy and stars would appear. Time would feel like it almost froze. I was incredibly happy. I fell asleep after that, but kept waking up every hour, so my sleep wasn't very good. I slept for 7 hours, and I still felt high the next day, but a lot less high than before. I think this was an afterglow, and during the afterglow, my muscles were still not very well coordinated. I couldn't pee very well, and generally, music still felt very orgasmic. I felt light euphoria and was generally a lot more empathetic. This afterglow lasted about 3 days. This story comes from a deleted user 11 years ago. This was the first time I was trying DXM. I was with my friend, I'll call her E, who was experienced in robo-tripping before. Robo-tripping is what is called a trip on DXM. I took 300 milligrams and E took 360 milligrams. We decided to play some Crash Bash on the PS1 as we came up. There was an added sense of giddy fun that came over both of us. We were laughing at every blunder we made, desperately trying to win. We felt the high coming on and I lost in the vast fluffiness that embodied E's cat. The cat seemed so ethereal, surreal, omnipotent. It was soft as hell too. We soon smoked some weed. I felt my body ripple and vibrate on the inside as the trip intensified by a substantial degree. My eyes were wide open and bugging out at this point. We wobbled over to the living room area and decided to watch the newer made Star Trek movie. It was certainly an experience. It was right in the middle of a massive lens flare space battle. It was unbelievable to my unlocked eyes. We laid in a seemingly near catatonic state with our eyes trained on the TV. I ate a bite of an apple, but stopped after I realized my mouth couldn't handle the sheer amount of feels DXM bestowed upon my taste buds. I needed to get back home, so me and E started walking home in the midnight blackness. The walk felt like a blur. We only stopped to smoke some weed. My hands trembled in confusion as I fumbled in the darkness to load my pipe. The smoke felt smooth against the frigid cold air I'd been breathing. My mind shot off again into a dreamy state as I walked the rest of the way home. Overall, it was a crazy experience because I had never felt all 5 of my senses become open and super sensitive like that before this experience. DXM has become a great portion of my spirituality nowadays, and I want to make sure to respect DXM as much as possible.